What's up, y'all? We live. I'm finally here. I'm sorry we had a little bit of technical difficulty, but we here. We in here. We're here to review the Barracoon, the Last Black Cargo by Zora Neale Hurston book review. It's been a long time coming. I've been planning on doing this probably for the past 2 years. Typically, I usually do reviews for Black American History Month. And this was my book of choice. The past couple of years have been pretty hard for me. I'm not gonna lie. I had a few losses that I've been sort of experiencing grief from, and just kind of had to take a mental health, step back from. And unfortunately, I was unable to review the book then. So I was pretty damn adamant about doing it now, just to honor the ancestor, Mr. Cudjo Lewis, and all those who were enslaved during slavery. The book, y'all, I'm just gonna jump right in. And I'll say before I jump right in, I kind of was hesitant. There's so much information, y'all. There's so much information. This book is amazing. But I took it a step further and did a little bit of research about the descendants after the slavery was abolished, and up until now, to this very day, and the things that they're going through now. I did some research on the Dohemy, who were the ones who enslaved Mr. Cudjo Lewis, Mr. Cotilda, who, if you guys aren't familiar, the Dohemies, some of you may be familiar with them from the movie The Woman King, starring Viola Davis, which was directed by Gina Prince Brightwood. Those women are the ones who enslaved Mr. Cudjo. And their tribe was the ones who enslaved him and a lot of our ancestors. But I'll get into that because I have my own opinions about all of that. I want to jump into the book though, because I'll go on rants, and I'm trying to be succinct because I'm trying to get out of here in like an hour. I'm not trying to be doing this all day. There's no rush, but I know I get long-winded, and I'm just trying to be a little succinct. So I got my little, my bullets and things, because if I do it, we'll be on here for 3 hours easily. I'll just jump right in though. The book, typically whenever I read, I'll usually go in, especially with autobiographies and books about things that I probably know a little bit about. I'll go in sort of thinking about what I already know. And there's a system, I forget what the system is actually called, but I'll go in typically thinking about what I already know. I'll think about the things that I kind of want to know, and then I'll look back and think about what I actually took away from it and what I learned. And going in, I knew about the Dohemy tribe and how, they went about slavery. But even still, like I said, I did even more research, and I learned a lot more than I even thought, and even what I probably took away from the book. But just thinking about how I approached it, I realized after reading the book. Let me turn this off. I thought I was gonna have a little bit of background music, baby. It's distracting. I'm not gonna lie. Approaching the book, I realized after reading it that I approached it with a very singular sort of idea about how slavery was enacted. Excuse me. And even just knowing, like, I guess what the book was about, and knowing what, I guess, you would read and sort of doing research about what the book is about. It didn't process that Mr. Cudjo was very much so an African man. When I think of slavery in America, I think of the past 500 years, which, I mean, of course, his story was within the past 500 years, but his particular story was in the last 5 years, literally 5 years and 6 months of slavery. Prior to that, there was 300 to 400 years plus of slavery enacted, and generations of people, at least 5 to 6 generations of enslaved people, our ancestors, who created an entirely different culture, who had to endure a lot more generationally for hundreds of years. And Mr. Cudjo experienced it within the last 5 years and 6 months, having come from Benin. And while it's still atrocious and he should not have been taken from his home, and he still had to endure everything that our other ancestors here had to endure. It is a very different story, and in my approach to it, I kind of just sort of lumped everybody into the same. And I think in terms of just like my perspectives on blackness and where we are with it, and again, disclaimer, I think I started the disclaimer and then I just didn't continue, but I think in the climate that we're in order for me to discuss this book fully, no filter, and just how I do it, which has been a while, but I think I have to say that my intention is not to disrespect anybody, and to be quite honest, after reading the book, I had a lot I wanted to say, but I'm kind of having to reel it back because I don't want to be disrespectful, not only to the ancestors, but to the families who are very much still alive and very much still having to deal with everything that came after, in very much so real time, and I'll get into even that later. But I also just I don't want to disrespect any other cultures of people, which I'm going to say what I have to say, but I just want folks to know that there is no ill intent. I know with all the diaspora wars and all of these sorts of things, people are used to a certain type of conversation, which, I have my strong opinions, and I'm a very prideful person as well, but at the same time, I'm not out here trying to hurt anybody. I'm rarely on social media anyway. If you follow me, you can look back on my page. I rarely post. I'm rarely on here at all. So anytime I get on, the intention is always good. The intention is always to leave folks with something fruitful, to contribute something positive, just in general. And I mean, the fact that I'm doing this in general, I'm very celebratory of Black American History Month. Very prideful of it. I think it's important for us to get this information regardless if you're part of the culture or not, because in the times that we live in with CRT and people literally trying to ban books like this and trying to sort of revise history, it's important for us to have these conversations. It's important for these conversations to be had with us and by us, folks who come from the culture. It's important for, it's just important to have these conversations, and we should be able to have them truthfully, fully, transparent, and in love, but at the same time, I think it's hard for some folks to accept the truth. And I think, too, a huge part of the issue I find with a lot of these conversations that are being had today, which there are also a lot of conversations that are very fruitful, and very helpful and very necessary. But I find whenever it gets to that negative place, it's typically super highly emotional, which these are very emotional conversations, but at the same time, I think that a lot of folks live in delusion, and I say that totally respectfully. Folks don't want to take accountability or don't want to recognize the history for what it was. I think for us as Black Americans, and just thinking about the sort of Pan-African sort of upbringing that we kind of grow up with, which I'm all for Pan-Africanism. I'm not really for pseudo-Pan-Africanism that a lot of Black Americans these days, and I can't say a lot of Black Americans, let me recant that. A lot of folks who subscribe to Pan-Africanism in the way that it's presented today, which is very much so limiting. There's a lot of anti-Black through lines. It's not really about reciprocation. There's ethnocidal tendencies to it. And I just don't subscribe to that, which in terms of just like ideology and things like that, just in general, I typically kind of shy away from group thinking and things like that in general. And yeah, yeah. But I say all that to say, I'm not here to hurt anybody. I'm not here to be disrespectful to anybody. I'm not here to start a diaspora war, but I am Black American. This is my history. And we have to talk about it, and we have to give the information as it is. We can't try to make it fit into some sort of narrative, which I often find is the case. Folks want to utilize information to perpetuate their narratives and don't want to be truthful and don't want to admit to not knowing everything. Because even me being here, I don't know everything. And I think, a part of the hesitancy is also because I want to get it right. Like, I want to make sure I'm relaying the right thing. I think a lot of people get on platforms and push a lot of information that isn't vetted and isn't, fully truthful, or they are standing in one specific position. But I digress. I'm not trying to hurt nobody's feelings, but we're going to talk about this book. Barracoon. Again, it was interesting approaching this book as a Black American, as a descendant of American child of slavery from the South. And it's very interesting, too, because I'm living in LA now. I have been for the past 12 years. And having conversations amongst other Black Americans, or just people within the diaspora in general, because I have friends in the diaspora, which is another thing. A lot of people who have these type of conversations, or have conversations about ethnicity and, the diaspora, don't necessarily interact with other people in the diaspora, and it's a privilege to be able to have that experience and to have had these conversations. And to also come from a sociological sort of background. I was a sociology major, and I also was a theater major. I was a double major back in college. So, approaching these kind of things, I live for this shit. And approaching these sort of conversations, I'm very careful because I know how nuanced they are. But with that being said, again, it was mind-blowing realizing, which when you read the cover of the book and it's telling you about the book, they tell you that he was taken from Benin. But for some reason, we're so used to having conversations about slavery and about the generations of people who were in America before, that it just didn't click. Which, he's an ancestor, and I honor him and I respect him. But there is a difference, and the difference, it doesn't have to be divisive, but there's a difference in perspective. But we'll get into that. The story starts off. So, if you're familiar with Zora Neale Hurston, she was an anthropologist. She explored Black American culture in the early 20th century, in the 1920s, 30s, etc. And just super prolific woman, just amazing in her own right. She would go all over the country, specifically in the South, and would just sort of learn a lot of the things that we might have missed out on about the culture, and just try to sort of give it back. She was always sort of writing books and plays and essays regarding the culture, and just sort of really doing the deep dives in the way that I'm very passionate about it myself, but very much super passionate about it and intentional about the work that she was doing. She was a part of the Harlem Renaissance, so she was friends with Langston Hughes and all the people that we love from that time. She lived in New York. Interestingly enough, I mentioned that this was originally intended to be a part of the 28 Days of Black American History Month that I do. Originally, prior to this book, in 1927, I believe, she was actually commissioned by Carter G. Woodson, who had his own papers and that sort of thing. She was contributing to, I think it was the Negro Journal or the, how am I forgetting? I'm gonna. We're gonna get into it. I want to give you the right information. It was called the brought him to Marijuana's Journal of the Negro History, and then there was also Journal of Negro History and study. It was funded by the Study of Negro Life. And she was going to be contributing to the Journal of Negro History. But she was also funded. There was a white contributor who like funded this particular study, but she'd already been doing work with Carter G. Woodson, who is the founder of Negro History Week and thus Black History Month, which was so full circle whenever I realized that. I'm like, oh my God. And I love the fact that like some of my favorite like authors and contributors from like the Harlem Renaissance, so just in history in general, were all working together simultaneously. It just always makes me super happy to read things like that. But Miss Hurston, she went down to Alabama, which Mr. Cudjo Lewis was a founder of Africatown in Alabama. And she would go down. She was very respectful, very intentional, very careful about how she approached him and approached his story, which I respected. But there was a cultural connection too in Blackness. She would go to him. She would bring him gifts, whether it be, watermelons or peaches or, some foods, and they would sit on the porch. He lived in like a windowless house, and he had a porch. He had his garden, which he was super proud of, and they would sit out there, and he would tell her his story and stuff like that. The woman from New York, she would send money and stuff like that, and stuff like that. So he was he knew that she was coming in, and I think at one point he wasn't getting the money or something like that, but he was paid for his work. And ironically, Mr. Lewis had become somewhat of a celebrity as the last survivor of the last black cargo. He had a lot of attention, a lot of media attention. People were wanting his story, wanting to sort of ask him about what that was like, understandably, and just trying to get that perspective, which was very rare. That last black cargo was an illegal cargo. At the time, it was, 1807, Britain had made it illegal for people to go over to Africa to enslave folks and take them from Africa. Then 1808, the U.S. did the same thing. So it was illegal for them to go over there, but they would do it anyway. And Timothy Meaher, who was the owner of the Cotilda, he built the ship and took it over there and ultimately enslaved, traded and enslaved with the Africans, Cudjo, and the people, 110 people that were brought over on the Cotilda. He was the builder of it. He was the enslaver, and it was based on a bet. So he wanted to bet that he could go over there and do it. He wanted to sort of play with the system. I mean, it was a lucrative business, slavery for them or whatever. And he did it. And he burned the ship down, which there's even more to that. But this was a story that folks wanted. People were adamant about getting it. We were used to slave narratives in one particular way, as I mentioned before. And, he was a commodity. People wanted to interview him. It's funny, I was going to do, because I read before, there was also a lady, which I wish I would have done a little bit more research on. I remember reading it before. But there was a woman who was also enslaved. She may have even been older than him. Who was alive at the same time or whatever, but I guess he got the attention. I have to do more research on that. But it would have been interesting to compare the stories, especially, again, considering Mr. Cudjo was from Africa. She, I believe, was American, and Black American, and it would have been interesting to have both sort of perspectives, especially considering that they were alive at the same time. But yeah, Miss Zora, she would go. They would, break bread together. Sometimes they would go get crab. But he was a very wise man. Granted, he wasn't the most educated man. And yet very wise. He was very much so a griot, an amazing storyteller. People would come to him all the time to ask him to do parables and things like that. A griot for every sense of the word. And it's interesting too, and I'll get into the rest of it, but it's just so many different little intricacies that caught my eye. Even just how he spoke. What's great about this book is that Miss Hurston, she makes it a point to write as he spoke in, I guess, would be considered a form of African American vernacular English, Black American vernacular English. And yet, which that attracted me to the book as well, because I love Av. I love Bav, and it's interesting knowing his history, and even just how, which I also have to get into, and we'll get into because it's part of the story, just how different culturally he experienced America, because him and I guess the survivors of the Cotilda, after slavery, they kind of sort of separated themselves from the Black Americans who had been here generations for various reasons. I'll get into it, but I say that to say it was I can't say very reflective. How can I put it? So being from the South and being very aware of Av in a very different way than, say, somebody from like New York or somebody from like California, and Southern Av in particular, because I mean we all speak it. We're all Black American. It's a cultural thing. But being Southern Black it's interesting because I know what it's, in the way that he speaks, it's very similar to how some of my folks today, who are country baby, like country backwoods, like I understand it, but some of y'all might not understand it, and sometimes I'll have to catch myself because some of my friends, one of my friends like last month, we were having a conversation and she was like, Greg, what the hell did you just say? And when I get comfortable, I get very country. So like, but it's very fast, and very like, not inaudible, but like, if you're not used to hearing it, you're not going to understand it unless you listening really hard. And I feel like how he spoke was very reminiscent to that, but I also think, even with African American, Black American vernacular English, it's evolved over time. So the way we spoke 20 years ago was a little bit different. The way that we spoke 40, 50 years ago was a little bit different. The way we spoke in comparison to the 1920s, it's very different. Like, we're using different words, different slang, different tonal sort of things. It's evolved. The way that we spoke in the 20s in comparison to slavery, very different. You know what I mean? So, and you also have to take in consideration geographical differences and things like that too. And also the fact that Mr. Cudjo is African. He was African. Coming into America. Very much so in the vein which he was not an immigrant. He was an enslaved person. But it would be very much similar in just thinking about just the language sort of portion of it. A person who's immigrating here and had been here for 5 years and 6 months, and had sort of taken on a little bit of the language, but still having some of that accent and it being very much so present. So in reading it, I'm taking this into consideration, having realized, oh, Mr. Cudjo was an African man from Benin who was enslaved for 5 years and 6 months and brought to America. All of those things definitely matter. And it was interesting reading just how he spoke. Granted, at that point, he'd been here for about 70 plus years, so I can imagine that he got a grasp on the language as well. So it's so nuanced that I'm just sort of thinking like, well, how did that affect this, and etc. and etc. I digress. They would sit and they would talk, and there would be days where, you know, he'd tell a story, he'd be ready to talk. There would be days where he was a little bit more melancholy, he didn't really want to talk. He was working in his garden, or he was doing whatever he had to do, and he didn't really want to speak. There were days where he'd be so willing to speak and so ready to just get it out, and would get super emotional. Very sweet man, very heartfelt man, you know, and just thinking about just the idea of the griot, and just, you know, how long he was speaking on things from 70 plus years prior, and, you know, him being as old as he was, like, to have that kind of a memory and to be able to recount it in the way that he did, amazing. And as tragic as it was, and as hard as it was, you know, there would be days where he couldn't talk about it. Sometimes they would just sit there, and sometimes he would get so zoned out in just recanting all of this stuff, that Miss Nielsen, Miss Hurston would just have to kind of just gracefully just walk away as he just kind of stared out, or just kind of inaudibly just sort of was in his own zone, which I couldn't imagine what they went through. I couldn't imagine that voyage. I couldn't imagine, you know, what he went through, what they went through, any of our ancestors, and especially, you know, folks, being brought into what it was, and taken from their home and having to, you know, deal with that. Because, like, I'd imagine what that was like before, but again, that's so many generations ago. You know what I mean? From the first Africans to come into America, that's like the 1600s. He came in 1860. That's tough. You know what I mean? This is like right before slavery ended. But his story starts off, recanting what it was like in Africa, what it was like, you know, just being there amongst his people, some of the traditions, you know, when he was enslaved, he was 19 years old. So he was an adult man, but he was a kid. You know what I mean? Like, he was still having rites of passage moments. He recanted, you know, him taking a liking to girls, and there was one girl in particular that he wanted to make his wife. He would kind of follow her around. He wouldn't necessarily say anything, but, like, he wanted to ask her, you know, to marry him. And there was somebody within his tribe that would see him out following her, and told his father. His father was... What did his father do? His father was like a... he worked... I want to say he was like a nobleman for the king or something like that. He worked somewhere with, you know, within that structure, and somebody had told him that, you know, he'd taken a liking to girls, and it was time for him to sort of have that rites of passage moment. And he talked about, you know, when that time came for him to have that, and they sort of guided him through that. I remember him saying they took him into the woods, or there was some place that he had to kind of go through, and there was like this like whistling noise that they were making with these instruments that they made, and he kind of didn't know what was going on, and then they kind of guided him into this like room, this place where they drank and they ate, and they let him know like they know that he's becoming a man, and he's not a man yet in the way that they are, but he is becoming, and just giving him those talks and guiding him through those things. It was interesting also to just hear him recant certain practices that they did in their village. One that comes to mind was the whole you can't kill a leopard and not present it to the king, because the whiskers of the leopard were poisonous, and if you took them, they would think that you were going to do some harm, or like some probably like witchcraft or something like that. You're going to try to kill somebody, hurt somebody, and so you had to present it to the king, and if the whiskers were missing, you would get in trouble. He recanted a time where there was a man who presented it to the king, but one of the whiskers was missing, and they questioned him about where the whisker was, and he lied and said that he didn't know where it was or whatever. They ended up finding it on him, and what they did was they took him into the town square, for lack of better words, the village, and well, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. What happened? Did they let that man off? They killed that man. I think that was another story though, because they found the whisker on the man, and I think they killed him. But there was another one where, because I'm pretty sure it wasn't the same story, because the man didn't get the chance to use the whisker. There was another story where a man had took a whisker or something like that and had killed a man. No, different cultural practice. So yeah, that was the end of that story. The man that took the whisker, he got offed. But there was another story about this man who had some issue with this other man, and he like killed him or something like that. And what they did was, that man I think had took like a whisker, and he was afraid that he was gonna kill him, or it was something like that. But basically, the man killed the other man. And what they did was they questioned him about it. They tried him about it in front of like the council and everything like that. And he was saying he was afraid for his life, etc., etc. And he killed him. And so they said, well, you gonna get in trouble basically for killing this man. So what they did, they took the dead body of that man, strapped him nose to nose to that dead man, and left him there, and told the town people, if he asks for water, don't give him no water. If he asks for anything, don't give him anything, because a dead man can't ask you for those things. So the people literally had to like watch him strapped nose to nose to this decaying body, and they weren't able to help him. And they were saying, Mr. Cudjo was saying that a man can't survive the stench of decaying flesh strapped nose to nose for him for more than a couple of days. That man didn't last 2 days. He died. So just telling me in the book, and his recanting of these stories about things and traditions like that, and just so many other things. But he also talked about when the Dohemy came, and what that was like. They, prior to the Dohemy coming to their kingdom, knew about what they were doing. And if I'm not, in my research, I was getting a mixed bag of things in regards to what happened with Mr. Cudjo's particular village. So in the research, after reading the book, it was said that his king said something offensive after the king of the Dohemy had passed away. That he said something that offended him, that offended the son, who was going to be the new king, and then they came after them. Which I know, based on what Mr. Cudjo recanted, that he had strong feelings about what they were doing in terms of enslaving folks. Mr. Cudjo said that, you know, they told him, or rather, he heard his king say that, you know, the Dohemy would be better off using their land and building crops and, you know, being able to support themselves that way versus enslaving human beings, which is totally right. Like, but they took offense to it. And what he also mentioned was that, you know, they would often, and this is a narrative that I'm glad that was briefly spoke on in the book, in regards to the slave trade, because you'll always hear some people say, oh, well, you know, they didn't have a choice, and just blaming everything on the white man. Which the white man should be blamed, but it's not so cut and dry. Like, they would say, oh, they would blame everything on the white man. They would also say, oh, well, these are prisoners of war. You know, these are prisoners of war, and they were just taking prisoners of war and trading them, and they didn't know what they were, you know, trading them into. They thought it was a more indentured servitude sort of tradition, as they did in Africa, and all of that sort of thing. And like, based on what I know for a fact that it wasn't like that the entire time, especially towards the end, where they were literally insisting that the slave trade not end, because they had built empires on slavery, like through slavery. Like they had built their wealth off of slavery, and they didn't want it to end, and it ultimately was a reason why, specifically with the Dohemies, their empire collapsed, because they were so dependent on slavery and slave trading. But it was a choice, and what we learned in this book is that, from Mr. Cudjo, is that his king felt that way. And him saying that, they took offense, but also they would go around, the Dohemies would go from different tribes, and they would set them up. Like, they needed an excuse in order to enslave those people. So like, versus them just going in, raiding those particular villages, they would say, oh, give me half of your crops, or be enslaved. And these kingdoms, it was like a power sort of play type of situation. Like, they were sort of trying to exert power over people and sort of make people submit to them, and they knew ultimately that a lot of people weren't going to do it. Some people did, but there would be people who just wouldn't, and those would be the people that they would enslave. So it was like a setup. It was a setup. They would go to these places, and they would, you know, do that sort of thing just to set them up, and then they would raid. And hearing, you know, reading it, this book was a very, like, I had to really take my time with this book. There's certain stories that just hit too close to home, that are just too hard to read. And mind you, the main story in this book is 94 pages long. It's not a hard read at all. Ultimately, I think it goes up to like 166 pages. If you want to read the afterword and the notes and all of that stuff, the appendix and all that stuff, like I do. But the Cudjo's main, like, recanting of everything, his life, it's about 94 pages. Reading how it happened, it was so tough. Like, I had to take my time with it. I had to really take it bit by bit, because it was too much. It wasn't too much. It was the truth, and it felt too real. But I find too, with that being said, that a lot of folks, whenever it comes to slave narratives and things like that, they're very hesitant just in general because there is still trauma that we live with. Dr. Joy DeGroy, she calls it post-traumatic slave disorder. We pass down all that trauma genetically. It's in our families, it's in our blood, dealing with the things that we did within the society, because the society is still a slave state. It's still very much so. It might not be as brutal, and I mean, I guess that's debatable in terms of brutality, but it might not be exactly how it was back then, but a lot of these customs, a lot of how this country works systemically is very much so still in that colonial sort of anti-black, brutal kind of state. And so we're still dealing with a lot of shit that is remnants of that. And it can be kind of hard for people to sort of approach slave narratives and discuss these things and have hesitancy. You always hear people talk about, oh, I'm tired of seeing slave movies. Oh, I'm tired of hearing about, certain things. And it's just like, we need to be talking about this, especially in the age of, CRT, them trying to disband all these books and all of this information and revise the history and constantly revising the history. It's important that not only we know the information, but we never forget it. We pass it down. We share the information so that people know. And again, we should never forget it because it should never be forgotten. This is the beginnings of this country. We are the builders of this country. We are America. And, what we go through is very American. And so, yeah, I had hesitancy with getting through some of these chapters, especially hearing it come from, and I say hearing it, reading it, hearing it, because I felt like I was there. And I guess that's a testament to both Mr. Cudjo and Miss Zora and their talent and just sort of storytelling and just in general, and their writing. But I'll say I'll digress and just, he was so young. He was so young, and to read, I keep saying to see. I felt like I was watching it. I felt like I was there. But to read, just the day that they came and how they came in and knowing how brutal they were just based on research, but hearing it from his perspective, about how, I think there were like at least 8 gates within their kingdom. They went to all the gates, covered all the gates, blocked them in. There was even when they tried to run out, they couldn't run out. There were soldiers there. The Dohemy warriors, the woman king warriors that I'm sure you guys are familiar with, and other male soldiers as well as the king of the Dohemy at the time. They approached the king as well, and tried to, get him to give in, but he refused. But, they came in chopping people's heads off, killing folks, putting people's heads on spears, just killing folks, taking folks to be enslaved, him being so young and going through all of that, and being separated from his family, not knowing where his mother was, not knowing where his family was, what happened to them, like those last moments of him, having with his family, like just thinking about what that would be like, to be trafficked, to be trafficked, but to also see your village, the people you grow up with every day, just being slaughtered because of somebody's greed or somebody's need to invoke power or somebody's need for self-preservation or whatever. There's no excuse for what happened and how they went about it. There's no excuse. Like, it was brutal. He ended up getting captured and taken outside of the gate. He was thinking about just trying to go for the woods, and I think he may have even ran and they captured him again or whatever. But he remembered seeing his king say, you know, he was born a king and he was not going to like leave a slave. Like, he was born a king in that village and he was not going to leave a slave. And he refused, and the king, you know, basically decapitated him, and took his head and put it on a spike, on a spear. Just tragic, like super tragic. They wiped out that tribe. And reading how they would wipe out tribes of people, villages of people, like, it makes me think, because I knew going in, I knew that was what would happen. Like, a lot of a lot of our ancestors, we are people of African descent. We've had mixtures, and we descend from multiple people as Black Americans, but we are of African descent. A lot of our ancestors don't exist anymore. They're not even around. A lot of our ancestors, a lot of the people who enslaved us aren't around anymore. There are people still around, and they are vocal. There are families who still benefit off of slavery. You'll see people who have written articles or who have, you know, talked about it. There are countries who've put out apologies and stuff, admitting to their participation. You can also, you know, if you ever go to Africa, you know, they still, some places have little museums, and they also use the dungeons for tourism, which I've heard they make Black Americans and people in the diaspora pay to go into those dungeons, which just does not sit well with me at all. But, you know, they talk about it, and it blows my mind how they would just go from place to place, just wiping people out like that. And Mr. Cudjo, he says that they were traveling for really long periods of time, and they would go from village to village, and the system that they had, they would put, so if they were going to surrender, they would put like a white flag up, and then like whenever they would go to the village or whatever, they would bring them like food and water and stuff like that, and they would give like the folks that were going to be enslaved or that were enslaved, that were being trafficked, they would give them like little food to like live off of or like eat or whatever, but they would have like feasts, not the enslaved folks, but the warriors or whatever, the enslavers would have like full feasts. And then if, you know, say for instance, folks didn't necessarily, didn't agree, didn't surrender or whatever, they would put up a red flag and, you know, they would go at it. And they would enslave those folks. It was interesting too, because there was the caveat of like, there would be towns where, say the king had just died and the successor to the throne would the upcoming king would be too young to make any decisions, and I guess from a moral standpoint they would leave them alone because it would be like taking advantage. Ironic, right? Like, you enslaving people and you talking, you have a conscience all of a sudden? No. But like he said that they sat at one of the places that they were at for like 10 days, and the Dohemy would line up the spears with the heads, because they kept the heads, line up the spears with the heads of their friends and family and burn them. And they would stay there for like 10 days. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? Like, having to see that shit. Like, having to see them being murdered just in general, but to like see these like ritualistic things that they would do, which I learned after too, that like the Dohemy would, which I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but where the Barracoons were and where the, near the shore where they would be, like, so there were the slavers, right? So there's the slavers, traders, the Europeans who would come. They would have a hard time gauging when they needed to come, and they would expect a certain amount of enslaved folks to fill their cargoes whenever they would come. So the Dohemies would round up all of these people and say they didn't come whenever they needed to. The enslaved folks would basically like wipe out or, you know, eat a lot of their food supply. So they would have to kill them. And they looked at it as like this ritualistic sort of thing, because they wouldn't want them to die of starvation, but they would look at it as like a ritualistic thing to do in front of the people or whatever, to kill these people. It's sick. It was very sick. And some of the other things like that they said that they would do, like playing with the, it's a little graphic. I don't even want to, well, I mean, they would fondle the women, and I believe because there were people that would help them, and I don't know the name. I know it said something about them being from Liberia, the Zon or something like that. I don't know. That would help at the shore, which was interesting, because I think in the afterword they spoke about how it was tough, like at the shore, to get folks. It could be tough to get folks to the ships. And there was at one point when the Cotilda had came that I believe there was another ship that was coming, and to avoid getting caught or whatever, because I think they tried to get like 160 folks or like 125 or something like that, and they had to leave like, no, I think it was like 125 that they'd come to get, and they had to leave like 15 behind because they didn't want to get caught, so they took the 110. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Yeah, they would sit at those places for like 10 days. They were watching the heads of their friends and family burn, and then they would make their way towards the coast, in Benin. And they would place them in the barracoons, which would be like the, if I'm not mistaken, the holding cells, or not cells, little things that they built, cells, holding cells. That's exactly what they were. That they built in between time to house the enslaved folks at the shore. So, let's see. Okay. I'm looking. I want to give you like the accuracy. Anyway, I don't want to pause for too long. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. You know, I like to give you the accuracy. But, They took them there, and they would be waiting there for really long periods of time. Like, I want to say weeks, months. They would feed them in there, and it tells you just how young some of those people were. They would play little games to pass the time by. They would look through the little peepholes, and they'd never seen white people before. But they would see the Dohemy talking to the white folks, or the white folks being led X, Y, and Z by the Dohemy, and it's just sad. And they would hear and see. They would hear people. They would talk to each other from the various Barracoons that were there, and they would hear people that they knew. They would communicate with people from their tribes or people that they knew. And then eventually they would have to be separated, which would make them very sad, obviously. They didn't want to be separated. And Mr. Cudjo, there was one person from his village that he got to stick with through the Middle Passage. He kind of, I think they were going to be separated at the shore, and then he kind of murmured or, I guess cried out to him or something like that, and they just took him on the boat. But, even just hearing him describe what the experience was on the boat, and I wondered too just how different, because again, this is after slavery was abolished. No, let me recant that. So this was 5 years and 6 months before slavery was abolished, but this was after it was made illegal for them to go to Africa, to get people from Africa. So at this point, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he turned a ship that was intended to export some sort of goods, if not weapons, into a slave ship. So I'm thinking about the journey and just how different it was, say, in comparison to those first groups of Africans who were brought to America. What the difference was in experience during that Middle Passage. Mr. Cudjo, he talked about how scary it could be, just the noises that the sea would make, how they would be crammed down in those slave ships, just arm to arm, no room whatsoever, and would literally be like that for 2 months. They would get one time out of the week to go up to the deck, which was just insane. Barely eating. They would give them water with vinegar in it to prevent scurvy. Just asinine shit. It just... And I think he said that out of the 110, I think 2 people died on his trip. But when they got to America finally, he says that, they had to wait for a little while, a day or so, or a little bit of time before, they could get off the ship. And mind you, before the Middle Passage, they'd taken their clothes. And Mr. Cudjo, it was interesting to hear him talk about it, because he was saying how, folks like to call them savages and say they naked all the time, and that, they don't have clothes and stuff like that. But the white man took his clothes, which could be said about a lot of things, right? A lot of those sort of stereotypes and things. The man told him, where you going, you'll have more than enough clothes. There's more than enough clothes that we'll give you, or something like that. It's bullshit. But they ended up getting to Alabama. And they had to be careful because they didn't want to get caught. The penalty for sneaking slaves into America was They be hanged. Which they never really enforced it like that. Like, I think there were like a couple of cases where they did, but they didn't really like suffer any real consequences. But to evade that, Timothy Meaher, who built the Cotilda, he burned it down. And what's interesting about that, which I'm getting ahead of myself, and I keep getting ahead of myself, a few years ago, they found the Cotilda. Like, it was in the bottom of the water there, that river, but they found it. And it was covered in mud. It's like down there. They were bringing up pieces here and there, but they found it. And for a long time, from what the family was saying, like, people would, try to make it seem as if it was like a myth, which they always knew. Their families constantly passed down that information. But they were constantly being gaslighted because people didn't want to come to grips with the reality of what happened. But when they got off the boats, they kind of had to be really stealthy. They took them somewhere to get clothes, and then they kind of split them up, and, they were sold off. And, he talked about what the conditions were on the plantations, what it was like working, he said that it was different. And see, this was something that kind of perplexed me about his particular experience, which I won't discredit his experience, because his experience was his experience. I have views, and a huge part of some of the things that I was thinking after reading was that I had to come to the conclusion that I won't disrespect his story, and discredit anything that he was saying, but I also can't totally compare experiences today with those from when he was going through what he was going through. I won't ever sort of discredit his story, or what he had to say, but based on what I know about my culture and just what it was like during slavery, we were very welcoming to folks. Our families were displaced and separated. They split our families up, and all of our loved ones, if not killed them. So we were very welcoming to outsiders, and it's always been that. That's just who we are. We're very welcoming, nurturing people. Like, we help everybody, and very rarely do we get anything back, but that's a whole other story. So to hear his story, which, in just thinking about some of the things that you hear these days in regards to what I'm about to say, you can't help but like compare, especially if you actually having those conversations with folks. He was saying that the Black American folks would make fun of him and call him savage, and make fun of how he talked and all that sort of stuff, which is horrible, and there's no excuse. Well, I mean, there is no excuse, but I wonder, I do wonder, because even in similar conversations that I had today in regards to ethnicity and folks from outside of America coming here, particularly Black folks, there's this conversation about the whole African booty scratcher thing, which I don't mean that to offend anybody, but when he was saying what he was saying about that, and then ultimately, whenever they became free, they separated themselves based on just because there was a history of them not getting along, and it was always the Americans were making fun of us, them fighting, and him taking pride in his sons fighting and whooping butt because of it and stuff like that, and it just and them separating themselves, them building their own churches, them, comparing themselves somewhat and saying that, we don't wait for the white man to give us anything, like we just gonna build it ourselves, and them not really assimilating into American culture, their Black American culture, but like maintaining the African culture and upholding the African culture. Even welcoming a nobleman from the Dohemy tribe, and forgiving him and giving him authority over them to some extent, as sort of a leader, making him like a leader, which I found interesting. Not in judgment, I just found it interesting. But in just sort of thinking about, the conversations about division and all of those sorts of things and how it tracks with what's happening today in a lot of ways, I found it interesting that was the conversation. And just thinking about, because, what is missing from this particular story is the perspective of the Black American, the Black Americans who were here at the same time. Obviously, they made there was a division between Black Americans and Africans. He would constantly speak to folks from across the water or the African soil, and him just doing and building, an African community within America. I mean, the town that they created was called Africa Town. So they had no intention of sort of assimilating into a Black American culture or becoming Black American in the way that we know it, which I found very interesting. But there were those disparities, and his recounting of slavery was very brief. He mentioned how hard the work was, how they would have them just working like crazy. He'd never worked so hard in his life, like just all the work that they had to do, all the types of work that they had to do. And then he spoke about how, the Union soldiers were announcing the end of slavery after the war and stuff. And what was interesting about that for me was, what we at with time? I told y'all I was gonna be tired. I told y'all we at an hour plus at this point. Okay. I'm gonna try to get through this, y'all. I told y'all I get long-winded. And I'm like hesitant. If you sense any hesitancy, it's because I'm not trying to like be on here for 3 hours. I'm just really not. But I really get stuck because I'm passionate about it. It was interesting hearing him talk about that and also talk about the end of slavery, and then just sort of putting myself in their shoes, especially them who were directly from Africa, like, and they'd already separated themselves to some extent from the Black Americans. So it's like they didn't necessarily have the same knowledge of the land, the same sense of community, I guess. And I say that very loosely because I'm sure even though they kind of separated themselves, there was some sort of sense of connection, and them having to sort of like work with Black Americans. A lot of them married Black Americans. So like a lot of them were from like the Yoruba, and I think there was somebody. And what's great about this book, they actually like list the different ethnicities of the people who built Africa Town. And like even me bringing up this, because again, anytime ethnicity is brought up these days, it's always this kind of divisive conversation that people try to make it a divisive conversation. People try to make it, I think people have made Pan-Africanism such a monolithic Black thing that they don't honor the differences in culture, and they don't honor the beauty that is that. It's hard for people, and also especially when we talk about Black American culture, I think people are so used to experiencing it one way, experiencing us in one way, whether it be through entertainment or whether it be from us simply just being, and people easily being able to sort of assimilate into like our culture and take on our culture and benefit off of our culture, that whenever we speak about pride or when we speak about differences in conjunction like with our culture, it's looked at as something divisive, which it should not, and it is never that way with anybody else. But I think because we're American, it's a very and because there are so many narratives, and because it is so because it does stop a lot of what people have become accustomed to in terms of how they experience in our culture, and especially whenever it comes to how they benefit off of our culture. There is a negative sort of connotation to, I guess, speaking on these things. But they speak on it in this book. And so if you see here, they list all of the different tribes, where these people are from, that started Africa Town. These are the founders and original residents of Africa Town. A lot of folks from Yoruba. Gumpa. Was Gumpa? I don't know if Gumpa was the person from the Dohemy, but he was Fawn. But yeah, some people from Alabama, some people from South Carolina, which I have, my dad's side of the family is from South Carolina. But a lot of Yoruba, some Hausa person here I see, which is in Nigeria. So yeah, Shamba, and there's a question mark on that. They don't really know what that means or what culture that is, I'm guessing. One person is from Africa, but they don't know, I guess, where. There's Noop. So yeah, different places. But they, they held on to their culture. But my thing was, like, I couldn't imagine, regardless of if they'd only been there 5 years and 6 months, or if they'd been there for generations, I could not imagine being freed and not having anywhere to go, like not knowing where to go, not having anything to build off of, not having any money. A lot of people had to end up going back on those plantations and making money, or like going, and some people, I know some people in this particular book just were adamant about not going back to work for those folks, not going back to work at the businesses that they had, not going back to do anything with them, and finding other ways of making money. Mr. Cudjo, I know a lot of people sold like watermelons and things like that, which, there's the negative stereotype about us only like eating watermelon. We brought watermelon to America, by the way, so it literally is our food. But it was also how a lot of people made money as well. So a lot of people don't talk about that. But the folks, the Africans who'd been enslaved for that 5 years, who were on the Cotilda, I should say, who'd only been there for 5 years and 6 months, went to Timothy Meaher, and, full stop, hold on. They elected Kasula, Mr. Cudjo, to go to Timothy Meaher, to ask him for some sort of land that they can build, houses on, maybe work, they just trying to build something for themselves, because, ideally the idea was that they would go back to Africa. They wanted to go back to Africa, and they realized how much that would cost, and they're like, well, we just, at the very least, need somewhere to stay. We need to make some money, so we can build something. Build more houses and stuff like that, all of that. Cthulhu, Mr. Cudjo, he went to Timothy Meaher, and that damn demon, he was like, oh well, no, I took really good care of y'all when you were here, because Mr. Cudjo, he told him, he was like, you took us from Africa, we don't have anywhere to go, we don't have anything, you enslaved us, could you give us land, could you give us something that we can build up for ourselves, and it was the least he could do, really, you know what I mean? But, and it pisses me off, because you still hear shit like that today, like, versus taking accountability. It's almost like with little kids, how they'll do something, but they'll just swear, but they'll make excuses and try to avoid getting in trouble, or avoid being looked at as bad or wrong, and just will constantly like try to avoid accountability. His reasoning was, well, I took good care of y'all. I took really good care of y'all, like when y'all were enslaved or whatever. And Mr. Cudjo, he spoke in the book prior to that about, how he wasn't as brutal as some others. How if they needed new shoes whenever they were working, that they worked their shoes down because they were working so hard, he would get them new shoes and stuff like that. But that obviously changed. So he told him, he's like, oh, I took real good care of y'all. I'm not going to give y'all no land. I'm not going to give you anything or whatever. So, they ended up having to like work for it. They ended up working. They weren't getting paid anything. They probably was getting paid like $1 a day. And eventually, they pulled their resources together. They bought the land. They built houses. They built a church. They called it Africa Town. And Africa Town was birthed. And again, it was separate from, the Black American community. But again, they intermarried with Black Americans as well. So, there was that. After that, honestly, Mr. Cudjo's life was so tragic, and so sad. Just really sad. And it's crazy how short this book is. Yeah. But after slavery, he, once they built the town and stuff like that, he realized pretty much everybody was married except him. So he ended up getting married. He, met a woman, and they ended up getting married. They ended up having 5 or 6. I don't know if that was a misquote in the afterword. Cause somebody said 6, but I was pretty adamant that he had 5 kids. I thought it was 4 boys and 1 girl. Which, just the way that things happen. So, okay, they built the household with each other, fell in love and had the kids and, all of that. Kids were growing up, and it's funny reading this book, like, you forget that, like, this is in a span of, like, 70-something years, you know what I mean? Like, it's 94 pages, but it's 74 years of, like, history. Which is crazy. But, they have the kids, and the kids are growing up. I'm pretty sure they had 4 boys and 1 girl. Their daughter, when she was 15, had ended up getting sick. And she ended up passing away. His only girl. Tore him and his wife up. His boys were growing up. And, sometimes they would get in trouble. They would get in fights. and things like that. And yeah, they would get in fights. I believe one of them ended up serving a little bit of time just before he died. Well, before I get to all of that, there was an instance too where Mr. Cudjo, he talked about getting hit by a train. He was walking. He had went to town. He did something. He was going somewhere, coming from somewhere, and the train had ended up hitting him, and he wasn't able to work the way that he wanted to work. It messed him up so bad. He took the folks to court. It was the white company. He took them to court. The lawyer was betting that they would get maybe 10,000 or 1,000 and something. 10,000 might be pushing it, especially for the time. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was over 1,000 something. Of course, the lawyer would get a percentage out of it. And it may have been some thousands. But anyway, he took them to court. And, you know, they won. But they didn't win thousands of dollars. I think they ended up getting like $650 or something like that. And or at least the portion that he would have got would have been $650,000. Because I believe it was like multiple thousands, maybe like 30,000 or something like that. So it would have been something. But the lawyers had ended up, I believe, taking the money or getting their cut and then like moving or something like that. And then the lawyer ended up dying, which karma, I guess, if it went down that way. But the courts didn't force them to like give him his money. So like he went through all of that stuff, like wasn't really able to work, like, and didn't get his money. Which I thought was really shitty. It was shitty. But you know, he went through all of that stuff, y'all, and like he continued to lose his kids. All of his kids died, I'm pretty sure. I believe I'm pretty sure all his kids died. Which one of his sons had married and had 2 little girls, which he loved those little girls. They would be in his garden when Miss Zora would come over, and you know, they loved their granddaddy. He would give them peaches and you know, all of that. But his kids, they passed away. Let me see. I'm looking for something. Sorry. One of his boys, let's see. One of his boys, I believe, also got really sick. One was killed by a cop. I'm pretty sure it was a white cop. But it's read a Negro police officer, which they had slave catchers and people who were, the police started as slave catchers. So let's leave it there. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was a white cop. And he said that the cop had ended up becoming like a preacher or something like that. I guess he got really religious after. But he killed his son. He shot his son. Let me see. I'm looking for something, y'all. Bear with me. Okay. Yeah. Another one of his sons had ended up getting like hit by the train as well. And decapitated. Let me see. Another one of his sons. Yeah, 6 4. Child, it was just tragic. All of it. And then it was just him and his wife. And it was him and his wife. And she was heartbroken, especially, like, could you imagine your child getting hit by a train and then decapitated, and you not believing that your wife sending you to go check it out, and you just like, no, my son didn't go here. Like, he would have been here. This ain't my son. Seeing the torso, and then the people who out there telling you that's your son, having to pick up the head, pointing out that the head is over there, which, oh my God. And then them having to bring the head in a box for you to see, and you looking at your child's face in a box. And then having to instruct them to attach the head back to the body, like tie the head back onto the body, attach it back to the body somehow, so people can come and see him for the repast. Not the repast. The repast is after the funeral. For the showing of the body. Like having to bury all of your kids after slavery, after being taken from your home country, put into slavery in a foreign country, going through all types of hell, then being freed 5 years and 6 months later, only to not have anywhere to go and having to build everything from scratch because the trash ass demons who enslaved you in the first place felt entitled to everything that they fucking built off your back and the backs of people who look like you, only to have to like bust your ass to have a little bit of something, and then all of your kids are either like murdered or die of sickness or freak accidents. Like, I could not imagine what him and his wife like went through on a day to day. And like from what he was saying, it was not easy. It was not easy. Like they took it really hard, especially with that son who was decapitated. Like he had to leave because his wife was just wailing. She couldn't take it. She passed out so many times and just like could not believe what she was saying, and he couldn't deal. Like I think he ended up falling in a patch of something, and just they had to like help him. He was saying he couldn't go back home and just hear his wife so heartbroken. Like, you know, I couldn't imagine. And you know, he was a sexton at the church. So, you know, somebody, you know, did his duty for him. Once that happened, and they continue, you know, him and his wife continue to live together, obviously, and go to church and do that. And I remember him saying there was a time where his wife, she had a dream or something. She have a dream, or he. I can't even remember that part. I'm not even going to mess it up. But I know they ended up going to the church because she wanted to go see the graves of their kids. She wanted to go visit their kids. I'm pretty sure she had a dream before about it. Or about the kids, and she wanted to go see the kids. She wanted to go see the kids. And, you know, he saw her at the graveyard and everything. And eventually his wife died. And he was all alone. All he had was his daughter-in-law and his 2 granddaughters. That's all he had. And it's so heartbreaking because when you read the book, you really get a sense of who he is. I think that's the beauty of what Miss Hurston was able to do. She brought who he was to the page, and she touched on, she told the story. She told the story. She told his story. He told his story. She recanted it from his voice. They told this story beautifully. And you really could put yourself in his shoes in ways that seem unprecedented. Very prolific work. I wanted to, let me see. There's a part that let me see. It was interesting. In the end, they grown so close. Mr. Cudjo wanted to go back to New York with her, but they eventually had to say their goodbyes. He's giving her some peaches from his tree, you know. And I'm gonna have to show y'all that. I'm looking for something in particular, y'all. Excuse me. Yeah, I think that's what I was talking about, the dream too. He'd had a dream about going to what was it? I'm gonna butcher that. Let me just look for it. Mount Vernon, in Alabama, and his wife was on, but she had to get off the train in Plateau. And him just having that dream and just how eerie, just even him telling that story was beautiful. But I wanted Miss Hurston, Zora Neale Hurston, took a photo of Mr. Lewis in front of his home in Africatown in Alabama in 1928. Yeah, he wanted a copy of it. He was adamant about it because he said that the people who typically came, they, you know, took the pictures. He never got one. But he dressed in his best suit and he removed his shoes because he said that I want to look like I'm in Africa, because that's where I want to be. And so this is that picture that Miss Hurston, she took. I hope you can see it. Let me try to lift it up. That's Mr. Cudjo Lewis. That's also Mr. Cudjo Lewis. And this is Miss Zora Neale Hurston. This book was amazing, y'all. It was absolutely amazing. I want to read you, because I'm going to get off of here, because I told y'all, this easily could be 3 hours. Like, I'm being very... The fact that it's not 3 hours is good. Let me say. Definitely have to read that. Okay. So let me see. This is the summary, I guess, of the experience that Ms. Zora had in her own words. She says, and this is towards the end of the book, at the end of the book, really. She said, I had spent 2 months with Kasula, who was called Cudjo, trying to find the answers to my questions. Some days we ate great quantities of Kleinstone peaches and talked. Sometimes we ate watermelon and talked. Once it was a huge mess of steamed crabs. Sometimes we just ate, sometimes we just talked. And other times neither was possible. He just chased me away. He wanted to work on his garden or fix his fence. He couldn't be bothered. The present was too urgent to let the past intrude, but on the whole, he was glad to see me, and we became warm friends. At the end of the bond, had become strong enough for him to wish to follow me to New York. It was a very sad morning in October when I said the final goodbye and looked back the last time at the lonely figure that stood on the edge of the cliff that fronts the highway. He had come out to the front of his place that overhangs the Coltrane Highway that leads to the bridge of that name. He wanted to see the last of me. He had saved 2 peaches, the last he had found on his tree for me. When I crossed the bridge, I know he went back to his porch, to his house full of thoughts, to his memories of fat girls with ringing golden bracelets, his drums that speak the minds of men, to palm nut cakes and bull roarers, to his parables. I am sure he does not fear death. In spite of his long Christian fellowship, he is too deeply a pagan to fear death, but he is full of trembling awe before the altar of the past. In her own words, it's amazing. Just amazing. And you really did feel the warmth of their relationship throughout the book. There were a couple of other things that I wanted to touch on. Let me just go to them real fast. So, on top of everything, and I didn't really want to mention it before, I'm going to go to the afterword. This is a brief mention of just a few things that I kind of touched on and just sort of my thoughts. And like, I'm not going to ramble because we're almost at like 2 hours. We're basically at 2 hours. I'm not going to let it go over 2 hours. But I kind of just want to give perspective because, like, in just my thoughts, if I showed you the list of my notes, like, I could be here all night. And just some of the thoughts that I'd had. And I guess to end it, I'll just speak to my hopes and my dreams, and my perspectives of what can be taken from this, how we can build forward, what it's looking like in terms of the climate and that sort of thing. But I want to read you just these few things. Let me see. Okay. And this is the afterword, which is, let's see, I say Hill wrote the afterword. Let's see if we can see who wrote the afterword. Forward. The afterword and additional materials edited by Deborah G. Plant. So Deborah G. Plant. Okay. And in it, so a lot of the afterword is about the drama, also that accompanied this book and you know, some of Ms. Hurston's writing, particularly in regards to Mr. Lewis, and just even some of the drama with Mr. Carter G. Woodson that I'm not gonna get onto in this video. If y'all want, y'all definitely read the book. For one, like, read this book. Definitely, because, see, I feel like I gave a good review of it or of what happened in some of my perspectives, but, like, even still, when you get into it yourself, it's just a different ball game. But here's something that Miss Plant touched on that I thought would be good to give to you guys. So, she says, as Hurston reflected on her interview with Cotilda years later in her autobiography, Dust Tracks on a Road, it gave me something to feel about. The interview changed Hurston, Hill observes. This elder, an Isha Yoruba in America, had schooled her in the socio-political and cultural complexities of my people. In Faces of Cotilda's recollections, the social constructions of my people and Africans were constructed by the reality of ethnic identifications, which not only distinguished tribes and clans, but also generated the narrative distance and the ideological difference that rendered one ethnic group capable of regarding another as stranger or enemy, and allowed that group to offer up the other to the transatlantic slave trade. One thing impressed me strongly from this 3 months of association with Cudjo Lewis, Hurston writes, the white people had held my people in slavery in America. They had bought us, it is true, and exploited us. But the inescapable fact that stuck in my craw was, my people had sold me, and white people had bought me. That did away with the folklore I had been brought up on, that white people had gone to Africa, waved a red handkerchief at the Africans, and lured them abroad, ship, and sailed away. Hurston was a collector of folklore. However, the folklore she was brought up on contradicted the folklore she was collecting from Cotilda. Moreover, all that this Cudjo told me, Hurston mused, was verified from other historical sources. Harlem Renaissance pundits and artists like Zora Neale Hurston were wrestling with the identity of the Negro. They had reclaimed the image of black people and asserted the value of black culture via white people and Anglo-American culture. There was a dedicated movement to do away with the image of the old Negro and usher in the new Negro, whose authentic culture and ethos were rooted in African origins. How did the butchering and killing of African others and expiration of whole societies fit within the profile of this modern, authentic new Negro? Might Hurston have attempted to avoid the inescapable fact of that dimension of African humanity that was motivated by the universal nature of greed and glory? Could it be that the woman in social sciences whose objectives entailed discovering and uncovering of African cultural retentions in America was blindsided by Cotilda's recollection of the inhumanity that was integral to the delivery at the port of Uda, which was the port that, we were enslaved into from Africa to America. Perhaps rather than force herself to deal with the disorienting facts that stuck in her craw, Hurston chose in the moment to submit a narrative about the raid that had already been penned. Yeah. So it's always been a part of the conversation, y'all, and it's something that we have to get not get over, come to grips with. Like, we were sold into slavery. It was a part of how they did things there, and I think the hard part for some people who just cannot come to grips with that, one second, is that to the point of the book, to the point of the afterword, it goes so far against what we were brought up on, that white people just went over there and just took all of us, and, that's what happened. It's so contradictory to that story, that it was solely the white people who did it. And that's just not the truth. In my research, I tried to sort of understand, like, what that system was like, or what it was like, which, regardless of how you try to chop it up, they always outnumber the white people that was coming there. And, we have this idea of, like, Pan-Africanism. We approach it with these Pan-Africanist sort of perspectives. And it's just like, that's never existed on the continent. This is a completely... Pan-Africanism is beautiful. I subscribe to it 100%. In the vein that I don't have to lose who I am. In the vein that my identity as somebody who is a descendant of American child of slavery isn't diminished. That my ethnicity isn't diminished. That I don't have to have an ethnocidal approach to who I am in order to be a part of said diaspora or to be respected, as a person who is a descendant of slavery, which slavery often is looked down on by many people. in many cultures of people. So I don't have an issue with the ideology. You know, we are people of African descent. We descend from other people as well. But, you know, in speaking to the diaspora, the African diaspora, I think it's important to understand the full history and what that looks like, and also not dismiss the cultural nuance that is throughout the diaspora, and also get lost in romanticization, because like we can't romanticize this stuff. We can't romanticize the conversation. We can't live in this delusion of like Wakanda. You know, I came up with the it's been so overused at this point, and it's been used by some people that I kind of don't even want to. I remember I was getting into it with a certain celebrity on Twitter at one point, and I came up with a term just based in the genre of Black Panther, Wakanda fantasy. Living in a Wakanda fantasy. A lot of folks are living in a Wakanda fantasy. And it's nothing wrong with wanting an aspirational thing, but you shouldn't have to erase yourself. You shouldn't have to seek validation or feel lost, you know, especially when you have a beautiful culture that people all over the world love, that, you know, is celebrated amongst your culture, even though you might not have come up in a place where maybe it wasn't as celebrated, or your family didn't, you know, whatever. And I get, you know, America also teaches not only the people who come here, not only the people who are here, but us, to devalue ourselves, to hate ourselves. That's part of the conditioning that we all get. You know what I mean? Even the people, you know, I've heard from many of my friends who are from Africa, friends from the Caribbean. I've heard first gen folks, second gen folks tell about how their parents told them about what it was like immigrating over here and the things that they were told. Those immigration officers are telling folks, do not mess with us, that we're criminals, that we on drugs. Without a doubt, my friend told me they are without a doubt having that conversation. And I've heard it multiple times from multiple people. So like there is that, but then there's also, you know, there's also the people who love us, who, you know, celebrate us, love our culture and those things. So we don't discount those people. There are those people who have a lot of hate for us, whether it's coming from an envious place, a jealous place, whether it's coming from a place of just ignorance, like not knowing better, believing the hype, or only recognizing the bad, you know, or the unfavorable, and or giving into the media, which is all propaganda, you know what I mean, whenever they come here, you know what I mean, and sending those stories back. So it's just a lot of misunderstandings, and, you know, I hate that whole it works both ways thing, because I hear people say that all the time, and it's always in a position of them not taking accountability. You know, like, sometimes things work both ways, but not all the time. Sometimes you just need to take accountability for the shit that we talking about. But at the same time, there are Black Americans who are just as ignorant. I find that a huge chunk of us are ignorant about things, but we know more than people think we do. And I also think that there are a lot of people, you know, the majority of Black Americans aren't participating in these diaspora wars. Folks trying to survive over here, and to be completely honest, we don't have to care. Like, we've never sat around thinking about it. I do thinking about other people. I do recall hearing other people say the same thing, like growing up and wondering, you know, about, well, why didn't they come back? You know, why didn't they come and save us? Why didn't they, you know, those kind of ideas. Why, you know, knowing what was going on, why didn't they do anything? Like, why didn't they come save us? Why didn't they come help us? Why don't they help us? You know, why aren't there, you know, reparations? Why aren't there, you know what I mean? Like, for those who know the history, like, why is there no reciprocation, especially, knowing the history and knowing how often we've gone to Africa to help. So yeah, those are a lot of the questions that come about. But like, in just thinking about the things that Miss Hurston were realizing, that I also just kind of realized in hearing his story and just thinking about his story after reading the book, and just even how it was happening here when they got here, and just how they kind of completely like separated themselves. It just was interesting. That was just a very interesting takeaway. I appreciate what I didn't get to it yet. I appreciate, because at this point their descendants are Black Americans. Having done the research after was very interesting, because it's like I read a lot of articles, I watched a few documentaries, and it's been interesting learning about the folks who are in Alabama now, and just how the neighborhoods are, how Little Africa is today, how they are very adamant about letting that history be known, how they keep that history alive, they never forget, how they have coalitions and they have a museum, and how they are very intentional about seeking redress, and also continuing the story, and getting the story out there, opening it up for the world, the rest of Black America, but the world to hear. And even with this particular story, because again, it is a very specific story of people that were taken from there, brought here for 5 years and 6 months, and continue to be here. They are still also very much so using this story for all of Black America, because there are subtle differences, but this is an American story. And in terms of reparations and redress, and in terms of having these conversations, it's the same conversation. And they're very adamant about that conversation being had. But it's interesting with them, because just as their descendants have continued, and I mean, it's the same with all of us, to be completely honest, but they're so, and I guess it could be said for a lot of towns and places in America, when it comes to the descendants and the enslavers. The Meahers, they've accrued over $36 million. They're millionaires, generational wealth, like, from off the backs of Mr. Lewis's family, as well as the rest of the families that remained in Africatown. Out of the 110, only 32 stayed in Africatown, and their descendants are still there. They have sat down, for a really long time. The Meahers would not communicate with them. They would not, they didn't have anything to do with them. And yet they owned a good chunk of the community, if not all the community. Throughout the community, they would have like markers, little planks with their name on it, all over the community, letting folks know that this was their land. The streets were named after them, and the communities were not totally ran down, but ran down. Dilapidated houses, food deserts. You'd have to go long rides to get to the nearest grocery store. vacant lots, unused lots that could be used for a variety of different things. The people, the descendants, the Cotilda, and they didn't have any ownership, and it was interesting because for a really long time, like I said, they didn't have any communication with the Meahers. There was actually, and I'll put some of these links in the description once I'm finished, but there was a 60-minute special with Anderson Cooper, and it was actually the first time they were able to sit down, the descendants of the Cotilda and the descendants of the Meahers, actually have a conversation about everything, like where they've been, why they've not had communication, and what their family has, how their family has affected the families of the descendants, what they hope for in terms of redress, what that could look like, and they made strides and things like that, but I'm curious to see what happens with that. And they were very emotional, and I love the I don't know if she was a millennial or a Gen Z, but she was very much so like, they need to know how they still benefit off of what our families were put through, because that's always missing from the conversation. Like, a family that's worth $36 million, so privileged to where they can distance themselves from this and yet still live off of that wealth. How does it make sense? I mean, it makes perfect sense. It's not right, but it makes sense. You know what I mean? But that's the privilege of having the complexion for the protection, not having to take accountability, and choosing not to take accountability and hiding behind your money and your privilege. And I love that they're having the conversation and that they are being more vocal. And to be fair, which I give it to the descendants of Timothy Meaher, because he was trash. I give it to the two ladies who were coming forward, and they mentioned how their own family have had clashes over the years and that they weren't on the same page. So I give it to them for even coming forward and attempting to have the conversation, especially on live television. But yeah, it's a part of and it's well overdue. It's well overdue. I'm glad so many more of us are actually having that conversation, and in regards to reparations and all types of redress, because what they were asking for from the Meahers wasn't even a lot. Like, they were talking about scholarship money, to be able to go to the best schools, just like the Meahers have been able to go to the best schools off of all that money. They were talking about, being able to build up the community and having flourishing communities and being able to lease some of that land off to companies like Walmart so they can have places to go, but also be able to like have wealth within the community, to be able to use the lots of land that have been vacant for years, have ownership of that land and be able to build the things that they need within their communities. Like, yes. And that's like bare minimum stuff. That's not even like getting straight up to the money. Like, where are the reparations? That's like saying like, look, we have needs. Like, our community is hurting, and y'all's planks, like literally big planks, old, that have been there forever, like with their family's name just in the ground. Like, I guess in the video they showed that they were starting to remove them or whatever, but like all over the fucking town and everywhere. And they talked about it, like everywhere you go, it's a constant reminder that we own you. And to some extent, we still own you, because look at your community. Like, this is ours and we do what we want with it. They brought like the walking stick of like one of the folks who enslaved one of the elders that was there, her mother or grandmother. I believe it was her grandmother. And like, the lady was crying, it really hurt her. I would have snapped. In my head as I was watching, I was like, I would have took that damn stick and I would have snapped it in half, like just right over my leg. Like there was no way. But yeah. And yeah, some of the questions Anderson was asking, I know it was because like it was a TV show, but like I was kind of just like, and I'm sensitive to it obviously for obvious reasons, but yeah, I'm gonna attach that to this video in the description. So many thoughts, y'all. Like I said, I've been on over 2 hours at this point, and before we hit 3, I'm gonna get these last points off, and we gonna hit the road, cause so I wanted to, let's see what this was. I'm glad we doing this though, y'all. Y'all don't know how much I wanted to do this. Like, I had every intention to get through this book, every intention to do this review. It's such an important story, and like whenever I first got into the story, like started to read it or whatever, and decided to do it for Black History Month, it was ironically right around the time that The Woman King had came out, and just I didn't see it. I refused to see it. And that's, again, I love and respect, Gina Prince Blackwood and Viola Davis. Viola Davis, who's from South Carolina. My family's from South Carolina. I've always had nothing but love for them both. But I was very just offended by that film. The fact that a white woman wrote that film, the fact that before all of that even came about in terms of the movie and just the promotion of the movie, which I had a very visceral reaction to, Lupita had did a documentary, which I also rewatched for this video. I watched it was about the Dohemy tribe, and I watched some other like docs and read up on some other stuff in regards to the Dohemy tribe too. Which I'll get to, I guess, before hour 3. But yeah, I had a very visceral reaction to it. Like, imagine, being in a city like LA, which is heavily redlined and heavily like being gentrified, like as we speak. But like, imagine being in the Crenshaw district on your way to work, every day, having to ride down the street and see a billboard of the people who enslaved your ancestors. Big ass billboard. And even like when you pass by, like, because they have posters like near the bus stops, like they have it on the side of buses and shit. They have it just everywhere. It's everywhere. But there was one in particular I would pass by every day that was next to a KFC. A big ass billboard of slave traders overlooking Crenshaw. And black folks having to ride past it every day. And this narrative of like, oh, representation, black women. Like, these ain't the black women we need to be given space to. These ain't the black women that we need to be glorifying. Not them. Not them. Like, I get representation and I get this aesthetic that of just warriors and fighters and how that could be like appealing. These ain't the warriors and the fighters. These are some villains. The villains of villains. Okay? The things that they did to his family, his mother, his family, the women in his tribe, chopping their heads off and putting them on spears. No. The Dora Milaje? No. No. The Amazons? No. The Dohemy warriors? No. The slave traders? Absolutely not. They were some of the most brutal people, and to hear and read about just how brutal when they didn't have to be. Because see, like, again, and I was touching on it before briefly, I did research. I'm like, why? Like, they didn't need to do this. Like, they just did not have to do this. Like, none of this would have to be necessary. But the people there, like I said, there was never in the way that we approach Africa and the way that we look at or have looked at it. I can't say that, you know, I know better, but I think some people still like look at it. I mean, historically, it just has never been like everybody's together. Like Erica Alexander said recently, and I'm gonna paraphrase it, I absolutely love her. So, and I remember it well because I was conflicted. I had to watch it a couple of times because I'm like, what is she saying? I follow her and she's very great whenever it comes to just speaking on our culture and speaking on similar things like this. But in the video, she was saying how we view blackness. Blackness is inherently, and I'm paraphrasing. This is not a direct quote. But it's inherently based on through the white gaze, that in places where black people dominate, like there's the majority of black people, they don't have to worry about things like color, like everybody's black, you know what I mean? Which being in a country like America, you know, I say the beauty of it is that, you know, we have a sense of blackness. We have an understanding of blackness in the sense, and we've passed that on to people who never really had a sense of blackness or togetherness or unity in that way. You know, the way that we unify as one complete culture in America, when America in itself is the size of multiple, like hell, the states are the size of countries in America. So the way that we maintain our unity and our culture, being from different states, is something to revel at when you really think about it in comparison. And it's something to be learned from in this sort of idea of Pan-Africanism, but that never existed on the continent, you know, and in thinking about, you know, just how slavery was happening on the continent at that time, you know, yes, to an extent, they had a different system originally, but that system was long gone. Like, it became a business. They were selling us out to white people. They were selling us out to each other. I mean, to think of, how did it go? The Hausa dominated, and I feel like at one point had enslaved the Dohemy. The Dohemy had came from Togo and came down to Benin and intermixed with a tribe of people there and created a new ethnicity. But they were adamant about not being enslaved by anybody, and this overexertion of like self-preservation and avoiding, you know, becoming enslaved, actually ended up being them sort of perpetuating what they were trying to avoid, which is just sad and insane. But the Hausa provided them with horses. You know, they needed horses, so they, you know, gave them slaves, or enslaved people. Europeans provided them weapons so they could evade being enslaved, and they could invade, you know, they can have power in that way. So they gave them slaves. The Oye, they had to provide slaves as tribute because of them being dominated by them. So yeah, that's how that went. They were dominated by the Oye, I believe is what it was called. But you know, their whole thing was having power and being able to have territorial expansions. So, you know, diminishing these tribes, completely eradicating these tribes and these villages, you know, in order to, you know, expand territorially. Yeah. And just like also having defense against like neighboring slave trading states. So it's just like, it was a mess. And it's just like, if there was, I wonder what things would look like if there was a if there wasn't so much ego and greed and, you know, which it is not solely them either. You know, it's a human thing. Like, greed affects humans, you know, so it's not to dehumanize anybody per se, and it's also not to create an excuse for anybody either, because that is not what I'm doing. I'm the last person that's gonna do that. But it's to say that, like, it's not so far-fetched to understand that this was the case. Like, it shouldn't be so far-fetched for people to come to grips with that reality. But I'll digress there. I want to read. Hold on. Let me make sure I'm reading the right thing. Okay. Oh, okay. So this portion of the afterword I thought was very, very dope. It's the American Dream / Dreams Deferred. The American dream is a major theme in the narrative of the racial difference. The shadow side of the dream, which is not talked about, entails the plundering of racial others. It was this dreaming that inspired both William Foster and Tim Meaher to flout the law of the U.S. Constitution, steal 110 Africans from their homes, and smuggle them up the Mobile River and into bondage. Though Foster and Meaher were charged with piracy, neither was convicted of any crime. No one was held responsible for the theft of Cotilda and his companions and their exploitation in America. Of the thousands of Africans smuggled into America after 1808, only one man was held accountable and hanged, and even he died proclaiming his innocence. Folklore had it that Meaher decided to smuggle Africans into Alabama on a bet. In April of 1858, while traveling aboard the Roger B. Taney, Meaher boasted to fellow passengers that he could bring Africans into the country in spite of the ban against transatlantic trafficking. He bet any amount of money that he would import a cargo in less than 2 years and no one be hanged for it. It was Meaher's dream to own land and become wealthy and to use slave labor to do it. He believed it was his birthright. Africatown. At the end of the Civil War, once they learned they were free, Cotilda and his compatriots began to plan their repatriation. They soon realized that their meager earnings would not be adequate to live on and allow them to save enough money to fulfill their dreams of returning to Africa. Also unaware of the activities of the American Colonization Society, they resolved to recreate Africa in America. Toward the end, the community of Africans elected Cotilda to approach Timothy Meaher about granting them some land on which to rebuild their lives as a free people. You made us slaves, Cotilda told Meaher. Now they make us free, but we ain't got no country and we ain't got no land. Why don't you give us a piece of this land so we can build ourselves a home? Meaher's response was one of indignation. Fool, do you think I gonna give you property on top of property? I took good care of my slaves in slavery, and therefore I don't owe them nothing. You don't belong to me now. Why must I give you land? Cotilda and the others rented the land until they were able to buy it from the Meahers and other landowners. The parcels they bought became Africatown, which was established by 1866. The African dream was inextricably bound up with Timothy Meaher's American dream, and their dream of return would forever be deferred. But the survivors of the Cotilda would work together to create a community that embodied the ethos and traditions of their homeland. In its founding and government, Africatown was similar to other black towns, writes Sylvain Diouf, but it was distinguished by the fact of its ethnicity. Although some African Americans were numbered among them as spouses and founders, Africatown was not conceived of as a settlement for blacks, but for Africans. Africatown was their statement about who they were, and it was a haven for white supremacy and the ostracism of black Americans. The bonds the Africans created in the Barracoons on the ships and in servitude were the source of their survival and resilience and the foundation of their community. Africatown is more than a historic site. It is a place expressive of African ingenuity and a prime model of the process of African acculturation in the American South. As Africatown is more than a cultural legacy, Olule Kasola was not just a repository of Black genius, tapped for a few decades, tales and colorful phrases, and Zora Neale Hurston knew this. She did not perceive Barracoon as another cultural artifact, illustrating the theoretical characteristics of Negro expression, but as one singular portrait of Black humanity. Slavery is not an indefinable mass of flesh, as Ta-Nehisi Coates writes. It is a particular specific woman or man. It is Kasola and his wife, Abile, their 6 children, the hosts of Africans who founded Africatown, and their shipmates who survived the Cotilda. We must courageously embrace this history because it is, as James Baldwin understood, literally the present in all that we do. And the power of this history, when we are conscious of it, is tyrannical. The history of Kasola's life elucidated for Zora Neale Hurston the universal nature of greed and glory as an inescapable fact of our common humanity, which I spoke to before. It's crazy. It is the common humanity that Hurston struggled to make the world understand. If we view Barracoon as just another brilliant example of Hurston's anthropological genius, we are gravely mistaken, and we do not fathom the full import of her objectives as a social scientist. In her endeavor to collect, preserve, and celebrate Black folk genius, she was realizing her dream of presenting to the world the greatest cultural wealth on the continent, while simultaneously contradicting social Darwinism, scientific racism, and the American pseudoscience of eugenics. She was refuting the tenets of biological determinism that were at the heart of the Great Race Theory. The body of Lord Hurston gathered was an argument against such notions of cultural inferiority and white supremacy, and it defied the idea of European cultural hegemony, as it also questioned the narrative of white nationalism. Barracoon is a counter-narrative that invites us to break our collective science about slaves and slavery, about slaveholders and the American dream. Completed in 1931, the narrative of Ule Kasola has finally found its audience, and Zora Neale Hurston's first book-length work has found a taker and is now finally published, though nearly a century has passed between the completion of the final draft of her manuscript and the publication of Barracoon. The question it raises about slavery and freedom, greed and glory, personal sovereignty, and our common humanity are as important today as they were during Kasola's lifetime. Yes, exactly. And that is that. Final thoughts and takeaways, and just thinking about how this can be used in any effort to sort of move forward and build. Everything that was said in that last passage and the passages I've read before, in regards to community. And, our country's changing in a lot of ways, as Joe Biden likes to say, it's a nation of immigrants, which Native Americans and enslaved Black Americans were not immigrants, but there are a lot of people who come from different places. I think it's important, especially now, that we fight for critical race theory, that we fight against the banning of books and just teachings, history, curriculums that speak truth to power, that speak to the truth of this country and what we're actually going through, because it's necessary, and it's not only necessary for us to learn, it's necessary for people coming here to learn, because if people coming here are getting a revisionist history or aren't getting the history at all and just coming here for all the reasons that they come here for, it's not okay. It's not okay, especially if there's a perpetuation of participating in the caste system that exists in America, this hierarchy that exists where Black Americans are bottom casted, and that people come here and perpetuate the same anti-Black racism that white Americans teach. You know, the system teaches that, and not even just white Americans, but all Americans teach. You know, perpetuate. It can't be perpetuated. I've heard many stories from friends of different races tell about, you know, their families, their friends, people that they run into that may be of the same race from a different culture, that think that it's okay to shit on Black Americans, you know? Because they want to feel better, but in their country and in their race, they're looked at as the bottom caste, as, you know, the people that aren't shit in their part of the world. I've had friends who've told me this instances. I've had friends tell me all sorts of stories about their families and just people that they know and have ran into situations. I've had my own situations with this stuff, and you know, Black history is American history. Very much true. And I'll regurgitate every quote that you've heard. Everything that you love about America is because of Black people. We built this. And, you know, in a time where we're seeking redress, in a time that we need redress and reparations, in a time where this country is changing so drastically and so much is happening in the world, we have to be adamant about this history being told. We have to be adamant about fighting for the things that we need. We have to be adamant about gatekeeping our history and our culture. We have to be adamant about how our culture is being relayed and who is telling the story. We can't allow it to be a I'm white, I say so type of thing. You know, we can't allow revisionist narratives to become the narrative. You know, it's not, and we bear that responsibility. I find so many folks get so worn down from having the conversation, and understandably, because it's not an easy thing to deal with, but at the same time, it's our responsibility as descendants of the folks who came before us. We are the hope and the dream of the slave. We are, when they were working in those fields, or whenever they were doing the things that they were doing, when they were innovating on, you know, these plantations, creating all of these inventions, creating all of this amazing culture, you know, doing all of these amazing things that we should be proud of and we should know about. Like, we were the hope and the dream of all of that. You know what I mean? They want the best for us. They wanted the best for us. And we owe it to ourselves to give that to the next generations. And we should want that for them as well. And everything that we do should be for them. You know, we have to, you know, what I love about the conversations about Black History Month, Black American History Month, that folks have been having in recent years in regards to even calling it Black Futures Month. Like, what future do you want to see? You know, we can talk about the past, and we should talk about the past because, you know, there's nothing wrong with talking about the past. You have to learn from your past if you want to build a fruitful future. You know, you can't just ignore the past, and, you know, you don't want to get stuck in the past. You know, because you want to be in the present, and you don't want to get stuck in the future either. You want to build towards something that you can be proud of, and you want to leave something behind for the folks that come after you. But that we bear that responsibility, and we don't bear the shame. And I think that's where a lot of the time folks get hung up on And I think a lot of that also comes from just not knowing the full story. And I think it's so crazy because, like, I'm passionate about this because I'm a history buff. I was a social major. Deep diving into sort of humanity and that sort of thing as an actor, as a writer, that's also a part of it. This is what I do. Everybody don't necessarily have that though, and it's just like that same passion. And it's like once you start to learn and once you know better, you can't help but want to continue to sort of learn more. It's like a chain effect, like a chain reaction. You just kind of, because you can't believe that you didn't know certain things, and so much information has been kept from us. You have to think about it. Like, there was a period in time where it was against the law for us to read. There was a period in time where it was against the law for us to write. Like, those things were intentional. And it's just like, I love that now that we live in a social media age, information is being passed along and people are doing it. And people are learning and people are growing and people are seeing the value in it. We talk about propaganda all the time. We talk about imagery all the time, and, how we depict it on TV and, in the media and stuff like that. And it's just like, our ancestors have left so much behind for us that there is no excuse. We have to take that responsibility on in order to give it to our children. We have to take that responsibility on to curate what that looks like, not only in their lives, but in our lives. We talk about algorithms all the time, different shit popping up in our algorithms that is just toxic and not good for us, which if you're not having that conversation, you definitely got to watch what you feed your mind. But, this sort of thing, it's important. And it's so funny in my experience because, again, I'm very rarely on social media like that. And if I am posting something, it's either something in regards to my career or something that I'm passionate about, something I care about, something that I think is going to help other people in the ways that it helped me. And I think it's interesting, again, to have the reaction from certain folks that try to find some sort of negative in why I do what I do or why I post certain things, and why, I think with this aversion to Black people being Black Americans, especially being prideful about ourselves, and there was a period where people would constantly tell us that we didn't have a culture, which is crazy. And it never made sense, especially for me being from the South. Like, it wasn't even a question, but, it's interesting how people just try to take our light and try to diminish us to make themselves feel better and be better. But I think, and to build off of our backs. And it's very much so, I think, a reaction to us having been enslaved in America, in the land of milk and honey. I had some guy, there was a guy I talked to, he was from the continent. Not to give y'all too much of my stuff, because I don't be putting my business out there. But I've had some very interesting experiences dating diasporically, and then this is one situation that I'll give y'all, only to just sort of speak to the point of how easy it is for people in general to just sort of dismiss us in order to get what they want. It was the height of the 2020 pandemic, and I met this guy. He was fresh from, the continent or whatever, and, we all were heavily traumatized just from everything that was happening. And, he was new here. I forget how long had he been here. It hadn't been super long. But, we all were hurting. And I remember it was around Juneteenth. And there were a lot of murders and things happening. And, we were in the middle of conversation, and like I'm, venting essentially, and letting me know how I felt about things, and talking about police brutality, and just talking about what we were talking about at that time, and sort of trying to share it with them in the sense of, you black too. Like, not only should you know about this, not that I was trying to force conversation on him. I don't try to force conversation on anybody. But that's what we were talking about at that time. And it was about our safety as well, because people were being picked off every day. People were being shot, eyes shot out, like tanks were in the streets. Like, people forget 2020 happened. I digress. This man, he was so happy to be in America, and just to see how he would treat his friends and family back home. Like, I'm peeping everything. It really rubbed me the wrong way. And he tells me, he's like, Greg, he was like, you shouldn't worry about those things. Like, you're in the land of milk and honey. You shouldn't worry about those things. Like, and then just to like hear like some of the perspectives that he had just about our culture, and how misinformed he was, and just how easily it was for him to just dismiss us literally being murdered and what we were going through here, because now he was in a country where he can make some money and build the life that he wanted. It goes to the last thing that I read in regards to the American dream and what their American dream was, and how even with Casola, Lord rest his soul, and I honor the ancestor, and of course they definitely should have had their own communities if that's what they wanted to do. It goes against, I don't know, I don't want to speak against him, but in terms of just what we were taught, to Zora's point, that whole stronger together, better together kind of narrative versus like, that whole Pan-African sort of, I guess, ideology that we kind of brought up on, like, it kind of goes against that. And it makes me even think about the folks who are coming here now. You have your little Ethiopians, you have your little Jamaicas, you have your little Africas, you have your little, you know what I'm saying? You have your predominantly X, Y, and Z communities. And even outside of the African diaspora, you have these other communities of people who don't come here to, and I guess we can bring it back to the African diaspora. Folks don't come here to help us. Folks don't come here to build with us. Folks come here for what they come here for. They come for the land of milk and honey. They don't come to help the people who are bottom casted. They don't come to help the people who are hurting. You know what I mean? And some people, they come here and they get it, and some people don't. But collectively, we have always helped other people. We have always, when you talk about the Ethiopian War, we were ready to fight for folks. We were ready to put our lives on the line. The U.S. government had to step on because we were so about that. When it comes to apartheid, when it comes to so many other instances, when you think about, those church sort of programs, we were sending barrels, whether it be to the Caribbean or to the Africa, of food and books and clothes and all these sorts of things, necessities and stuff like that, whenever they would be going through whatever they were going through, whether it be some sort of environmental crisis or whether it be just because they needed it. We've always been proactive in sort of helping other black people elsewhere, but there's been a level of reciprocation that's never happened that just has always rubbed me the wrong way. And just thinking about what they were talking about in the afterword about, the creation of the Africa Town and what they wanted in recreating Africa here, and separating themselves and, building their communities with that particular ideology and stuff like that, which, again, their descendants are their descendants and are Black Americans. But, I use that, I guess, as an example of it can't be a situation like that moving forward, where people are completely disregarding the folks who built the country. Because it's always people disregarding the folks who built the country. It's always folks completely disregarding the people that made it possible for them to come to the country. Because America was under a quota system before the 1965 immigration reform. Wasn't nobody coming over here. We fought for that. So, you know, there's a level of responsibility, accountability, and that other people bear. And it's funny because it's like anytime there's some sort of political upheaval in any industry, or, you know, in politics, or there's some sort of cause, the expectation is for us to be there and to show up and to, you know, be advocates, because we are always fighting for other people, and we are always fighting for ourselves because we have to, and because we're always disproportionately hurt at the end of the day. But nobody's really showing up for us. Nobody really shows up for us. Nobody's, whenever they are going through that stuff, they're never really speaking up for us. You know? There's never a real level of reciprocation. And oftentimes I find, you know, because, yeah, you saw people during like 2020 or some of these other instances throughout the years that are notable, like where people got out and did things and stuff. But you also saw a lot of performative shit. Like people doing things so they could get sort of some social sort of clout or what have you. You know what I mean? And it's just like, and there was nothing really outside of marching, or there was no real sort of action in their everyday lives, in their privilege, to say, okay, we're going to help these people because they need it, and we are in a privileged position. This country is the way it is. It is a caste system. There is a hierarchy, and these people are bottom casted, and amongst this pandemic are disproportionately hurt. Nobody was thinking about that. Nobody's ever thinking about that, is the point, because like we're 4 years, well, I guess a couple of years outside of the pandemic, and I mean, I guess it's still kind of going on to some extent, which is a whole other story, but it's just like, with everything that's happening, especially being in a election year, I feel like we're regurgitating the same thing over and over again, and I think people know better. They just don't want to do better because it doesn't serve them, and that's always the problem. But I think when we're having that conversation as Black people, it's in America. Like, we can't get off code. And, you know, it's not even, because see, whenever I have these conversations, I'm talking about who I'm talking about, but at the same time, it's not just Africans, it's not just Caribbeans, it's a lot of niggas, it's a lot of folks here that I don't F with. Because all skin folk ain't kin folk. And that includes some Black Americans. Like, it's some people, I've been thrown under the bus, okay? And I've lived to tell the tale. Alright? Like, I've been thrown under the bus and I survived to tell the tale. Like, and you see it every day. There's a straight up, and I'm going to say it, straight up coon in North Carolina, my home state, that recently was nominated to be a governor, and the way that he's out disparaging Black Americans with this anti-Black rhetoric is so embarrassing. It is so embarrassing. And he should know better, knowing the history of North Carolina and how the wealth of North Carolina was built. When you get into how rice was cultivated in North Carolina and how we brought rice over here, and you know how they would go to specific areas in Africa and have us going back with them to sort of get the people to come back to North Carolina so we could cultivate rice, which they call Carolina Gold because it built the economy. Like, come on, y'all. And this man gets on there and says that we don't deserve reparations? Please. But it's just like, it's that sort of thing. So it's not specific to one group of people, but at the same time, it does hit different when it's from somebody from somewhere else, because there is a level of privilege. And, you know, there have been people in the past, whether it be Malcolm X, whether it be Muhammad Ali, who have spoken to these things before, whether it be James Baldwin, whether it be Maya Angelou, people that we revere have always had these conversations. Zora Neale Hurston and a lot of people during the Harlem Renaissance have been having these conversations about, and it don't have to be a us versus them sort of situation, but if we really gonna do this thing, we really have to do this thing. And, you know, again, that's not to, you know, absolve any of the shitty behavior of some Black Americans, you know, but I think when you come to somebody's country, it'd be the same things that could be said for how folks are treated whenever they come here, which I hear a lot of grade school stuff, and that's the whole other thing, and it shouldn't be discounted, but at the same time, Black Americans also are in the South. Like, a lot of these places you probably go to and are experiencing these things are people who look like us that ain't us, that speak like us and take from our culture and kind of cosplay. I mean, I say that as a fan of, like, you know, horror films and anime and comics and stuff like that, Comic-Con. Like, we dress up like, you know, fans of the things that we love. You know what I mean? And it's very much so that. Like, but aren't that. And so when you say that you're going through these certain things, are you experiencing from a Black American? And if you are experiencing from a Black American, like, you can't paint everybody with the same broad brush. And that can be said on the flip, but at the same time, if we are experiencing something, or there is a certain sort of experience that's happening collectively, that's different. That is different. Because, I mean, after the 1965 immigration reform, you didn't see an influx of Black immigrants until like the 2000s. And even since then, even since 1965, like, how many diasporic Black businesses do you see? How often do you see Black Americans being hired on jobs where Black immigrants are, you know, being, you know, either propelled at high positions or owned? You know, and I feel like the answer to that is typically people are helping their own ethnic groups. People are helping people from their own communities. And this is not to be divisive. This is just speaking truth to power. And this is from somebody who actually is in community with people throughout the diaspora and have had conversations with people outside of the diaspora, have had conversations with friends from different races. I don't know everything. I'm not opposed to, you know, I don't speak on nothing that I don't know about. I'm not sitting here, I don't have any position to uphold. I'm just telling it like I see it. And there's a lot of work that could be done, but I think I like the idea of, Seren, I remember she was saying something about Black strongholds, like us building up. I forget who, and I think she got it from somebody. I forget who she said she got it from, but us building Black strongholds wherever we are, and like building up those communities so we can always have somewhere to go. Because I think what's tough for us and what a lot of folks don't understand about being Black American is that, like, when this shit fails, we have nowhere to go. This is our home. This is our country. Like, this is where we're from. And I remember even during the pandemic, like, folks parading around and like playing, you know, but low-key serious. Like, this shit goes, I'm going back to where my family from. Like, if this shit goes down, I'm leaving. We ain't got that option. So it's like, of course, we have to have these type of conversations, and, you know, if there is community to be built, like, we have to be speaking truth to power. We have to be speaking to the experiences of what we're experiencing in real time. We have to have the conversation about the experiences of separation and anti-Blackness within the Black community and what that actually looks like. We have to talk about, you know, the sort of romanticism that we kind of have whenever it comes to who we are as Black people. and this whole monolithic idea and of blackness and everybody black, and just sort of you know, the delusion of pseudo Pan-Africanism. Because again, I'm here for Pan-Africanism. I'm not here for, you know, erasing who I am, erasing my culture to become this African person like a lot of these American Pan-Africanists be trying to push. And they have this whole like xenophobic, anti-black, and not everybody, because a lot of people actually get it. A lot of people actually get it, and you know, a lot of people who subscribe to certain ideologies like that. But I think when you subscribe, and I'm not one to subscribe to anybody's sort of ideology, and I mentioned this before, I'm not a group thinker. But I think it can become super religious, and people, the intent isn't what folks are saying the intent for is. Like, people don't know how to think outside of the box and say, okay, well, if we are going to really do this, like, how do we do this? I have a friend, my friend was actually supposed to come. I should have sent her, I'm about to get off of here now, but I should have sent her a reminder. She really wanted to go on. She was reading the book with me. And we're having conversations behind the scenes. We actually did a podcast, so maybe if she doesn't hop on within the next like 5 minutes or so, I'll just link like the podcast episode that we did together where we were kind of chopping it up. She's from, where's the one from? Oner is from, I want to say, I don't know exactly where. I want to say Ethiopia, Somalia. She's Somali. I was going to say the Great Horn. The Great Horn, Africa. Yeah, and just, you know, chopping it up with my friends and seeing where we are. And, you know, we support each other. We have nothing but love for each other. All of my friends throughout the diaspora, and they get it. And we're able to have these conversations, and we're able to learn from each other. But, you know, you can't do that if, you know, and again, these pseudo Pan-Africanists who ultimately feel lost and feel victim to white supremacy, which we are victims of white supremacy, and you know, they are trash. But at the same time, like, your hate for America ain't got nothing to do with our ancestors and what they built for us and the culture that they built for us, what that they gave for us, that they created for us, the things that they left behind, the information and the love that they left behind for us, the inventions, the creations, the soul of this nation. Like, we are the soul of this nation. So it's just like, you know, they fought in every war. They built the country. They, you know, I could go on, but like, turning your back on that somewhere you don't know about, I don't know. And it's not to say that we can't have a connection to Africa or any other place, but I think that the only time that you hear folks talking about us, the only time you hear about anybody in the diaspora erasing who they are is whenever it comes to us, because we're American and because folks have gripes with America. You never hear that conversation with folks elsewhere in the diaspora, and that's a problem. And I get people have issues with America in regards to American imperialism and things like that. I completely get it, but that ain't got nothing to do with us. Like, that ain't got nothing to do with us having culture and being who we are. And you have to question, like, what is the version, like, what is the problem with that, with us gatekeeping and being who we are and celebrating who we are? What's the issue? What's your issue with it? If there's an issue, are you willing to admit that you have an issue with that? And why is that? You know, so it's just like, not to go too much onto that, but I think in sort of in Miss Hurston speaking to just being shaken up and having to come to grips with learning about the fact that we were sold off, and it completely going against what she was taught in regards to white people just raiding in and, wreaking havoc and raising hell, like, which they raised a lot of hell, but they had help. And not just from Africans, let's be clear, like, other people participated in slavery, in the transatlantic slave trade. So, yeah. I think the experience Miss Hurston had, though, is one that a lot of folks have had. And you see a lot of folks having. And I think the confusion, because I've even talked with some of my friends from the continent who lack a form of understanding. There is a level of resentment from being sold off. But then there's also, you think about the people that you talk to who are here on these jobs that turn their nose up, that will suck up the white folks at these schools. You know what I mean? Like, it's the thing. It is a thing. I've experienced it myself. And me, recant my experience should not be something looked at as a negative. Should not be looked at as me being divisive or being anti anybody being xenophobic, because that's just not what it is. But it does definitely happen, and it shouldn't, which is why we talk about it. But I think, if to the point of the book, if certain things are so fragile to the point to where there has to be that level of separation, what exactly are we talking about? Like, how is there going to be a sort of bridging of gaps and things like that? Like, how are we building together if you still talking about something that happened in grade school, which, where I'm from, we didn't grow up with a lot of fucking diasporic people. A lot of diasporic people. I recall one person, specifically from the continent. They didn't necessarily assimilate into our community like that, but we were all cool during school, and they got a lot of flack for certain things, but we all got flack. Like, we all were teasing each other. We all got stuff. So, it just kind of is what it is. And I think about my friends from, like, New York who ended up moving back to, like, my hometown and stuff like that, who were, like, Puerto Rican. They can't talk about that Puerto Rican stuff, but, when you come to the South, baby, you gonna get it how you get it. You're not really assimilating into that unless you can. And, of course, they were also black, so, they were the homies. But I think it's gonna take work, and it's gonna take a lot of honesty. I've seen people who I admire from the diaspora speak out. Off the top of my head, I'm a huge fan of Lovecraft Country. And the actress Wumi, who played Journey Smollett's sister, she's Black British. She's African British. But she's married to a Black American man, and she spoke about how when they were out and about, and they would like get pulled over by the police, her husband, who's American, would ask her, like, tell her to put on her, British accent so they could get off. And it's just like, there is privilege, like, and people know it. And, like, we don't talk about it all the time, but these things happen. I think about Cicely Tyson in her very last interview, where she was speaking about the disparities within the entertainment industry, specifically in film, where, there is a replacing of Black American talent with African and Caribbean talent. And how it's a real disparity. And, like, she is Caribbean. Like, she came up in America early on during Jim Crow. So, and prior to Jim Crow, if I'm not mistaken, like the early 1900s, around the time Mr. Cudjo was alive, during the time Mr. Cudjo was alive, as a matter of fact, the very least Miss Zora Neale Hurston for sure, but she immigrated to New York, her family, and the rest is history, but she spoke to it. And I respect that so much because she didn't have to. But there have been plenty of people within the industry who have had that conversation. And I use the entertainment industry as an example because it's reflective of so many different industries. This conversation is had in various industries, in the collegiate space, in academia, at these colleges, in terms of, who they're letting into the school. My phone is dying. And all of those sorts of things. It's a real conversation that needs to be continuously had. Hopefully I'll be able to have it. I don't want to rant too much longer. I feel like I hit a lot of the points. I'm sure there were things that I missed. Let's see. Yeah, I hit on the history of the Dohemy to some extent. The family after, and what they were hoping for, and what they were going through. I absolutely love the book, and learned just a lot that I didn't know about. Like a lot that I knew some of, but like even just hearing his story and just the sadness and just how heartbreaking it was. I couldn't, just being able to put myself in his shoes and imagine being in that village, like so many of our early ancestors were, and to have that happen, and so close in proximity to, our ancestors, we are probably like a good 10 generations in at this point. A good 10, 12, who knows? Definitely in the double digits from our ancestors who were brought from Africa. Mr. Cudjo was at least 100 years ago at this point. He's the closest to that experience that we've seen. And just to imagine what that could be like, it's heartbreaking. To imagine your mother not knowing what happened to your mother, more than likely her having been slaughtered. You being forced into slavery, having to watch the king of your village be beheaded, the people that you grew up with, you went to school with, that you loved, be beheaded and their heads put on spikes, and you having to sit there and watch them burn for 10 days. Having to be separated from your family and your friends that you were put into bondage in these barracoons with before you went onto the ships. And then separated once you got to America. And then having to see your whole family either be murdered or die. And never being able to go home again. And having white folks just continuously shit on you. And to do as they will. And to never see justice. Because he never saw justice. When shit was happening to him with those trains and all of that sort of stuff. And stuff's happening to his kids. Never saw justice. Won in court and never saw justice. He spoke about his son, because there's something that happened. He was talking about his son having watched and said there ain't no justice. Like, you still ain't got paid from getting hit by that train. Which was facts. Especially after early 1900s, late 1800s. So, and then having to watch his wife, like everybody that he loved, died. And, only having his daughter-in-law and his granddaughters, who he loved, but retaining his culture and being prideful in his culture, I resonate with that. And I hope that with this video, that you guys are inspired to read this book. I hope that I was able to give you something in this long rant, child. Because we've been on here a good minute. Well well over. We've been on here for 3 hours. Hold on, 6. Hold up. When did I get on here? We've been on here for 3 hours. I told y'all we was gonna do this. I said this is what was gonna happen. We was gonna end up being on here for 3 hours. And that is exactly what happened. And I swear I was trying to, I had the stuff on my phone. I was trying to be as succinct as possible. When I got on here, y'all saw how adamant I was about trying to like be on point. And I started ranting. And this is what happened. But I'm glad I did. And I hope that you guys got something from it. I hope that it inspires some sort of pride or understanding and perspective. Give it a like. Give it a share. Give me a follow. Give me a subscribe wherever you see it. Shout out to my folks who typically see these on YouTube after the fact. I hope you love it. Shout out to everybody who came into the room. There were so many people that came into this room as I'm like ranting and getting into it. Wow. So many of y'all. Thank y'all so much for supporting. Wow. I can't wave. Oh, wow, that's so many of y'all. I can't wave to everybody, but I'm gonna try before this thing dies, because like my phone is literally dying, and this phone literally I can have this thing going all day and it'll never lose juice. But I'm waving to everybody. Yeah. Can't wave to everybody. But thank you so much. And until next time, this is Greg Kennedy. I am signing off, babe. Happy, it's not Black History Month anymore, but this was intended for it. Happy Black History 365. Happy 28 days of Black American History Month. I love y'all so much, and I do this for y'all. I appreciate whoever watches, everyone who came in. Thank you. And until next time, peace.